The Riddle of the Sands by Erskine Childers. Retold by Peter Hawkins. Read by Wayne Forrester. The Reason Why. Why has this book been written? In October 1902, my friend Carruthers came to my office and told me the story of the yachting trip that he and his friend Mr. Davis had recently taken in the Baltic and the North Sea. The account of his adventures both astonished and alarmed me, and when he asked for my help in preparing this book for publication, I agreed readily. It is well known that Britain's coastal defences are dangerously weak, so the secret information discovered by Carruthers and Davis is of great importance, and I fully support their wish to make this information public. The difficulty they had was that an Englishman from an old and famous family would be shown in their story to be a traitor, and this would cause pain and misery to an innocent young lady whom they are anxious to protect. The names Carruthers and Davis, therefore, are not their real ones, and the names of all other persons in this account have also been changed. But why publish secret information of national importance? Should it not be kept secret, known only to the government, whose job is to make good use of such information? Indeed, that would normally be the best thing to do, but not in this case. The government, although informed of the great danger facing this country, has chosen to do nothing, and that is the reason why this book has been written. London, 1903. Chapter 1. An Invitation to the Baltic Sea. The letter arrived as I was dressing for dinner in my rooms in Pall Mall on the evening of the 23rd of September 1902. London was deserted at that time of the summer, and I had become very bored and depressed with my daily routine of work at the Foreign Office and dinner at my club in the evening. All my friends were away, enjoying themselves at country house parties, but here was I, a fashionable young man with a bright future, who knew all the best people and belonged to all the best clubs, and who was forced to remain in London because of my job. I had encouraged my friends to believe that the Foreign Office could not manage without me during the summer, but the plain truth was that my work was neither interesting nor important. It consisted mostly of taking messages for absent officials, whose own holiday plans had upset mine. Although my friends had sent me sympathetic letters, it was clear that I had not been greatly missed, and now, at the end of September, I realized another bitter truth. 2 more days, and I would be free to start my holiday. But I had nowhere to go. The country house parties were all breaking up, and though I could always go home to Yorkshire, of course, which fashionable young man wants to spend his holiday with his own family? I was, without doubt, extremely depressed. So when a letter with a German stamp and marked urgent arrived that evening, I felt a touch of interest, even excitement, as I opened it and read. Yacht Dulcibella, Flensburg, the 21st of September. Dear Carruthers, you will probably be surprised to hear from me, as it's a long time since we met, but I write in the hope that you might like to come out here and join me in a little sailing and perhaps duck shooting. This part of the Baltic is very beautiful, and there should be plenty of ducks soon, if it gets cold enough. The friend who was with me has had to leave, and I really need someone else, as I'd like to stay out here for a while. If you can come, and I do hope you can, send a telegram to the post office at Flensburg. I know you speak German perfectly, and that will be a great help. Yours ever, Arthur Davis. Then followed directions as to how to reach him, and a long list of various things for the yacht that he would like me to buy and bring out. The letter was a turning point in my life, though I did not know it at the time. During my lonely dinner that evening, I was undecided. Yachting in the Baltic in October? I must be mad even to think of it. I was used to the kind of yachting party that took place in warm summer weather, on comfortable, luxurious yachts, with servants to bring meals and drinks. But what kind of yacht was the Dulcibella? Davis, I remembered, was not rich. We had been at Oxford University together, and had been quite friendly, but I had not seen much of him in the 3 years since then. On the few occasions we had met, I found him rather dull. His letter, too, seemed rather unpromising. His friend had left him. Why? The Baltic was beautiful, yes, but what about October storms? Did I really want to spend my holidays freezing in the Baltic, with a man who was sure to bore me to death? 2 days later, I was on the night ferry to Holland, with a huge pile of luggage and a ticket for Flensburg in my pocket. I had to go all round London to find the things that Davis wanted for the yacht, and I felt I was being generous and unselfish. Davis had said that he needed a friend, so I was doing a friend's duty and answering his call. It was just possible, of course, that I might enjoy myself as well. The train took me east, then north, through Germany, and by 10 o'clock the next evening I was standing on the station platform at Flensburg, and Davis was greeting me. "It's awfully good of you to come." "Not at all. It's very good of you to ask me." We watched each other cautiously. Davis, in ordinary old clothes, did not look like my idea of a yachtsman. Where were the fashionable white trousers and dark blue jacket, like the ones lying neatly in my big suitcase? "You've brought a lot of things," said Davis, looking anxiously at my luggage. "You asked me to get most of them," I replied. "I've brought you the hammer, the rope, and the rubber boots you wanted. Oh, and the gun you were having repaired." "Oh, yes, thank you. I didn't mean those. It's that large case. You couldn't manage with just the small bag?" "No, of course not," I answered, puzzled. "Well, never mind. It's not far to the dinghy." And he bent down to pick up my luggage. "But where are your men?" I asked. "Oh, I never have any paid men on the Dulcibella," he said cheerfully. "The whole fun is doing it yourself. It's quite a small yacht, you know." I looked at Davis in silent horror. Then I picked up my bag, frowning. "Come on, then," I said. "You'll like the Dulcibella," said Davis, a little anxiously. "She's very comfortable." Loaded down with my luggage, we made our way in the dark towards the harbour. Davis stopped at the top of some steps that disappeared into the darkness. "The dinghy's down there," he said. "You go down and I'll pass the things down to you." The stone steps were slippery, and I had only a wet piece of rope to hold on to. I went down carefully, conscious of collecting dirt on my trousers. Near the bottom, I slid on the mud and sat down with one foot in the water. I climbed miserably into a very small boat. "Are you ready?" called Davis from above. He passed down my large case, which almost filled the little boat. The rest of the luggage followed, making a big pile that shook dangerously every time I moved. Somehow Davis managed to climb into the boat and started to row across the harbour. "The yacht is a little way away," he explained. "I hate to be too near a town." Then, a few minutes later, "Look! There she is!" In the dark, I could just see a small yacht with a light shining on its mast. Davis jumped on board and tied up the dinghy. "Now, pass the things up, and I'll take them," he called. I did as he said, thinking unhappily of the last time I had been on a yacht. The paint shining in the sun, the decks as white as snow, the men eager to help. How different from this horrible, clumsy business in the dark. When we had finished, I climbed on board. The deck was covered with boxes and cases. Davis, who was staring at my big suitcase, suddenly seemed to wake up. "Come on," he said cheerfully. "I'll show you around." He dived down a ladder, and I followed carefully. At the bottom I turned and hit my head on the low ceiling. "Mind your head," cried Davis, too late. I looked around and saw by the light of an oil lamp that I was in a tiny cabin, almost filled with a large table. On each side there was a bench-like seat, above which was a shelf holding books, maps, and so on. Through a small door beyond the table, I could see an old cooker. The whole place smelled of oil, cooking, and seawater. "You see," said Davis, "there's plenty of room to sit up straight." I wondered if this was meant to be a joke, as I was bent almost double. As I sat down, my knee came into contact with a sharp edge. "Watch out for the centreboard," said Davis. "She's a flat-bottomed boat, you know. Good for sailing in shallow water, and in deep water you lower the centreboard. That way we can go almost anywhere." He disappeared up the ladder and started passing down the boxes and cases. Soon they filled the small cabin to the ceiling. I heard him trying to push my case through the doorway at the top of the ladder. "It's no good," he said, reappearing in the cabin. "You'd better unpack it on deck and drop things onto your bed." He lit another oil lamp and proudly showed me the other cabin, which had 2 narrow beds built along the sides. "This is where we sleep," he said. "I'm not sure there's enough room for all your things, though. I don't suppose you could manage without some of them." "No, I couldn't," I said crossly. "Now, if you could move out of the way, I can get out too." He suddenly looked miserable at the way I spoke, but, tired and depressed, I pushed past him and climbed up on deck. In the dying moonlight, I opened my case and took out some of the things. The rest, the clothes I'd worn on my last yachting holiday, I put back in the case, afraid that Davis might see them. I closed the case and sat down on it. There was only one good thing about this depressing arrival. It wasn't raining. This thought made me look round at where we were. The water was as smooth as glass. There was not a cloud in the sky, and the bright stars were reflected in the dark water, stars above and stars below. I could see a few little white houses on one shore, and the lights of Flensburg in the distance on the other. In between, the darkness hid the open sea. Everything was quiet except for Davis moving things about in the cabin. How it happened, I do not know, but suddenly my mood changed. Perhaps it was the miserable look I had last seen on his face. Perhaps it was one of those moments of clear-sightedness that people sometimes have, when I saw my silly selfishness compared with a simple, generous nature. Or perhaps it was the air of mystery about the whole trip. I suddenly felt ashamed of myself, a fashionable young man, tired and dirty, sitting on a case that was almost as big as the yacht that was to carry it, and with no idea of what I was doing there. I decided, then and there, that I was going to enjoy this strange and unexpected adventure. "Supper's ready," Davis called from below. I went down the ladder and was astonished at the change in the cabin. All the luggage had been put away, and everything looked neat and comfortable. There were glasses on the table, and the smell of hot whiskey and lemon hid the earlier unpleasant smells. Davis could see from my face that I had got over my bad mood, and he was obviously happier. We sat smoking our pipes and talking for a while, and then came the problem of going to bed in the tiny cabin. After bumping my head and elbows several times, I finally managed it and lay down between the rough blankets. Davis, moving quickly and easily, was soon in his bed. "It's quite comfortable, isn't it?" he said, as he blew out the light. I felt a drop of water on my face. "I suppose the deck's not leaking," I said, as politely as I could. Davis was out of bed in a moment. "I'll just put something over it for tonight," he said, "and I'll fix it in the morning. I've been doing some repairs, but I must have missed that bit." In a few minutes he was back in bed, and soon after I fell asleep. Chapter 2. A different kind of sailing. After a restless night in my uncomfortable bed, I was woken next morning by water pouring down on top of me. I sat up suddenly and hit my head on the ceiling. "Sorry," cried Davis cheerfully from above. "I'm washing the deck." "Come up and swim. Slept well?" "Quite well," I replied crossly, and stepped out of bed into a pool of water. But I went up on deck and, diving over the side, buried my stiffness and bad temper in the loveliest fjord of the lovely Baltic. I climbed back on board, and while I was getting dressed on deck, I examined the Dulcibella. She seemed very small, but was, in fact, 10 meters long and 3 meters wide. She looked large enough for sailing weekends close to the shore, but I could not imagine how she had made the journey from England to the Baltic. She was not a beautiful boat either, sitting low in the water, and with a very tall mast. But in spite of her plainness, she looked very solid and safe, and I was grateful for that. Davis cooked a surprisingly good breakfast, better than my London cook ever managed. As soon as we had washed the dishes, he said, "There's a good wind. Let's sail down the fjord," and disappeared up on deck. I joined him there, trying to be of use, but he did not need me, or even notice me. He seemed to be everywhere at once, raising the sail, pulling on ropes, and steering the yacht all at the same time. Soon the Dulcibella was turning away from the shore and sailing towards the open fjord. I sat on deck, lazily watching the green fields and little white houses pass slowly by. With the clear blue sky and the sun shining on the water, it was a beautiful view. I looked round at Davis. He had one brown arm on the helm and seemed lost in his thoughts. For a moment I studied his face more closely than I had ever done before. I had never considered him worth spending much of my valuable time on, as I had always thought him very ordinary. Now I was beginning to see how wrong I had been. In that calm face I saw honesty and bravery. Above all, he was sincere. I began to wonder how often I had misjudged other people in the past. I had always been so confident of choosing the right men to know. Suddenly, Davis threw me the chart. "Just tell me which side of the buoy we should pass, will you?" he said. I looked in horror at the black marks on the paper, which meant nothing to me. Soon he said, "Never mind. I expect it's all deep water round here." In a minute we were passing the buoy, probably on the wrong side, since sand could clearly be seen below us. Then there was a loud, unpleasant noise under the boat, and the Dulcibella ran aground. With a little effort we managed to push her off the sandbank, but I felt horribly guilty and apologized to Davis. "You must remember I'm a complete fool when it comes to sailing," I said. "You'll have a lot to teach me. I've only ever sailed with a crew to do all the actual work." "Crew?" said Davis, shocked. "Why, the whole fun of the thing is to do everything yourself." "Well, I've felt all morning that I'm no use to you. I'm awfully sorry, but it's just the opposite. You may be all the use in the world when—" He did not finish, and became lost in his thoughts again. That night we anchored in calm water in the shelter of the shore, and after supper I asked Davis to tell me about his voyage from England. He spread his charts on the table and took his logbook from the shelf. "There's not really much to tell," he began. "My friend Morrison and I left Dover on the 6th of August and sailed to Ostend and up the Dutch coast. Then we travelled through Holland by river and canal to Rotterdam, on to Amsterdam, and back into the North Sea. We sailed round the Zuider Zee, then north to the Frisian Islands. Look, they stretch for 190 kilometres from west to east along the Dutch and German coast." He suddenly became enthusiastic. "Look at this," he said, pointing to an area covered with little black marks on the chart. "It's all sand between the islands and the coast. There are channels through the sands, but they're all wrong on the charts because the sands keep moving all the time. It's a wonderful place for sailing. No towns or harbours, just a few villages with a shop where you can get food. The islands themselves are really just big sandbanks, you see." "Isn't it rather dangerous sailing there?" I asked. "Not if you know what you're doing," he replied. "The Dulcibella can sail in very shallow water. Of course, You can't help running aground sometimes. At high tide, those sandbanks are all hidden. Everything looks the same. Didn't you ever take a pilot? I asked. Pilot? Well, yes, I did take one once. And what happened? Oh, I ran aground, of course. It was stupid of me to follow him. I wonder what the weather's doing. He climbed quickly up on deck. Rain coming, he said on his return, and possibly wind, but we're safe enough here. Time for bed, I think. You haven't finished your story yet, I said. Well, Morrison had to leave me when we got to Terschelling, the third island. I followed the Dutch islands eastwards to Borkum, the first of the German islands. When was that? I asked. About the 9th of September. That's only 2 weeks before you wrote to me, I said. You were quick getting to Flensburg. Yes, I went to Norderney, the third German island, but then decided to go straight for the Baltic. So I sailed to the Ida River, took the canal to Kiel on the Baltic, then turned north for Flensburg. I was a week there getting repairs done, and then you came, and here we are. And now we really must go to bed. We'll have a fine sail tomorrow. He ended with rather forced cheerfulness, and quickly rolled up the chart. He had cut short the description of the last part of his journey. Why, I wondered. Perhaps he did not want me to realize how dangerous a voyage it had been. Whatever the reason, there was some mystery about it, and I wanted to know more. Tell me about the passage to the Ida River, I said. That was rather a long one, wasn't it? About 112 kilometers, I suppose. Didn't you stop anywhere? Only once. I took shelter behind one of the sandbanks one night. Oh, he added, I didn't fix that hole in the deck above your bed. I'd better do that before the rain comes. You go to bed. He disappeared. While I prepared for bed, I wondered again what he was hiding from me. I heard hammering above my head, and then he reappeared and got into bed. I say, do you think you like this sort of thing? He said. If the scenery is as beautiful as it was today, I shall. Ah, yes, the scenery, he said quietly. You must think I'm odd, liking the Frisian Islands so much. How would you like sailing among those sandbanks? I should hate it, I replied sleepily. Did you ever see another yacht there? Only one, he said. Good night. Good night. Early next day, we raised the sails, and the Dulcibella made her way into the fjord, where the wind was blowing the sea into short, sharp waves, and I began to enjoy my first day of real sailing. Again that night, we turned back to the shore, where we anchored. Among the trees, only 100 meters away, we could see a little monument. We took the dinghy to investigate. It was a monument to those who had died in the war between Germany and Denmark, when the area became German. It was very simple, but, in the moonlight and the peace of the evening, it was very moving too. Germany's a great nation, said Davis quietly. I wonder if we shall ever have to fight her. During supper we talked about war, and especially war at sea. This was Davis's hobby, and he knew a lot about it. When he took a book from the shelf, I saw that his books were all about war at sea, or sailing in small boats. Looking at the books reminded me that I wanted to read his logbook, so, while Davis was washing the dishes, I took it down and began to read. There was much detailed description of winds, tides, and distances travelled each day. I turned to the later part, about his voyage to the Baltic. The logbook reached the 9th of September. Then the next page jumped to the 13th, and described the following 3 days with only the most basic details. 13th of September. Decided to go to the Baltic. Sailed 4 a.m. Fair west-northwest wind. Anchored for night in the shelter of Hohenhorn sandbank. 14th of September. Nothing. 15th of September. East wind. West by south 6 kilometers, northeast by north 24 kilometers. Arrived Ida River 11:30. I then noticed a page had been torn out of the book, between the 9th and the 13th, and realised that the entries from the 13th to the 15th had all been written at the same time. Clearly, the logbook had been changed after the event, but why? And what event? I decided not to ask Davis about it, feeling unwilling to force a confession from him. After all, I thought, it was probably nothing of any great importance. Before going to bed, we went up on deck and stood, listening to the wind in the trees. "The wind is sure to move round to the north soon," said Davis. "I asked some fishermen about duck shooting, and they said the best place would be Schlei Fjord. That's about 20 kilometres south, on the way to Kiel. We need a north wind for that." "I don't mind where we go," I said. "You mean anywhere in the Baltic?" asked Davis. "Yes, anywhere round here," I said. We stood for a while, looking at the moonlight on the water. Then we went below. I had told Davis that I wanted to learn to sail the yacht in all sorts of weather, so he made me work hard for the next 2 days. I learned how to steer the yacht in a high wind, when to take the sails in, when to let them out, how to deal with the little storms that blew up the fjords. I learned to work with ropes that were wet and stiff, and to tell the depth of water by using the lead line. On the second day, I heard the sound of ducks, and, looking up, I saw about 20 of them, flying in a V-shape across our path. "You see," I cried, "there are ducks here." "Yes," Davis said doubtfully, "but I've heard it's difficult to get permission to shoot them here." He paused. Then, without looking at me, he added, "If we were in the North Sea, among the Frisian Islands, we wouldn't need permission." "You surely don't want to leave the Baltic?" I cried. "Why not?" he asked. "But be sensible, man," I said crossly. "It's almost October. The summer's over, and the good weather's finished. Every yacht like ours is back in harbour for the winter. We've had the good luck to find these lovely fjords to sail in, and we've just seen there are ducks here. Why on earth make a long and dangerous voyage back to those islands in the North Sea?" "It wouldn't be very dangerous," he replied. "But what for? What's the point?" I was beginning to lose my patience, and was about to say something that would have ended our holiday there and then, but Davis spoke first. "I'm sorry, old man," he said with a smile. "I'm being awfully selfish. You've been a real friend coming all this way to join me. Let's get to Schlei Fjord and ask about the ducks. We must be almost there." We soon found the narrow entrance to the fjord and the pilot's little white house, where the fisherman had told Davis to ask about duck shooting. The pilot was very helpful, and told us the best places to look for ducks. Davis and I were friends again by the time we returned to the Dulcibella, and all thoughts of going to the Frisian Islands seemed forgotten. I went to bed, hoping for the chance of some duck shooting the next day, and expecting no more excitement than a sudden fierce storm blowing up the fjord. I had no way of knowing that my autumn holiday was about to turn into a very different kind of experience. Chapter 3. The Missing Page in the Logbook. Next morning, we found the Dulcibella wrapped in thick fog, which meant, of course, that nothing could be done until it lifted. After breakfast, we heard someone on deck, and a short, grey-haired man appeared in the cabin doorway. "Bartels!" cried Davis. "Was that the Johannes that I heard arrive last night? Have some coffee." He spoke in his very poor German. "This is my friend Carruthers, Captain Bartels of the Johannes," he added to me, and went to make some coffee. Bartels said quietly to me, "It is good for Captain Davis to have a friend with him. He is a fine young man, but he is too brave. He takes too many risks." "Where did you meet?" I asked, interested. "In an ugly place in ugly weather," he replied very seriously. "Has he not told you?" Here it was again, the suggestion of some mystery, some dangerous event that I did not know about. I decided there and then to ask Davis to tell me the truth. Just then he came back. "Bartels helped me out of a bit of trouble in the North Sea, didn't you, Bartels?" "It was nothing," said Bartels. "But I've told you before, Captain, the North Sea is no place for your little boat at this time of the year." He drank his coffee, and before he went, he advised Davis in a fatherly way to think again about going home before the winter began. Davis went with him back to his own boat, but returned at once and sat down opposite me in the cabin. I think he knew what was coming. "What did he mean?" I asked. "I'll tell you," said Davis. "I'll tell you the whole thing. It's a kind of confession, I suppose. It's been worrying me a lot, and perhaps you'll be able to help me, but it's for you to decide." He paused for a second. "Something happened when I was in the Frisian Islands that I haven't told you about." "It began near Norderney," I said, "about the 9th of September? How did you guess that?" he asked in surprise. "You're not very good at hiding things," I replied. "Go on." "Well, you're right, Norderney. I'd been asking the local people about ducks, and they told me I should ask a German called Dolman, with a big yacht, who did a lot of shooting. On the 9th of September, I came across his yacht, the Medusa. She was very big, very smart too, new paint and a crew in uniform. I decided to go and speak to him. "Just a minute," I said. "Let's have a look at the chart." "Here's Norderney," he said, spreading out the chart. "There's a harbour at the west end of the island, the only real harbour on the islands. The Medusa was anchored near it, and I rowed over after dinner, and was taken to the main cabin. It was very grand. Dolman was finishing dinner." "What was he like?" I asked. "About 50, tall and thin, with grey hair and a short grey beard," replied Davis. "I asked about the duck shooting, and he said that there was none at all, but he wanted to know all about me and what I was doing there. We talked for a long time, and he was quite friendly when I left. I intended to sail on eastwards next day, but Dolman came to visit me on the Dulcibella, and then invited me to dinner on the Medusa a couple of times. In the end, I stayed 3 more days anchored at Norderney." "How did you spend your time?" I asked. "Well, we talked, and I met his daughter 2 or 3 times. I hadn't seen her that first evening." "What was she like?" I asked. "Oh, a very nice girl," he replied, turning a little pink. "Finally, we left Norderney together. Dolman said the Baltic would be better for duck shooting. We agreed to sail together as far as Cuxhaven. He was sailing to Hamburg, and I was going to take the new ship canal to Kiel. It's about 100 kilometres from Norderney to Cuxhaven." Davis paused, looking at the chart. "We left on the morning of the 13th of September," he began again. "The weather was bad, and there was a strong wind from the northwest. It was nothing for a big yacht like his, of course, but I soon realized I had been a fool to set out. After Vangeoog, the last of the islands, the wind got really strong, but it was too late to turn back by then. The sand stretches 25 kilometres from Cuxhaven right out to the Scharhörn, so you have to go round the Scharhörn to reach Cuxhaven, and I knew the sea would be extremely rough there. Suddenly I saw the Medusa was waiting for me to get closer. As I reached her, Dolman shouted to me, slowly and clearly, 'It's too rough for you to go round the Scharhörn. Follow me. I'll show you a shortcut through the sandbanks.'" Davis paused to point out the places on the chart. "Look, here's the Telte. It's a wide channel through the sands. It's all right if you know your way, but later on it's cut in two by the Hohenhörn sandbank, and it gets very shallow and difficult." Dolman seemed to know what he was doing, so after a moment's thought, I held up my arm to show that I would follow him. "You asked me if I ever took a pilot. That was the only time." Davis spoke bitterly. "I followed him into the Telte Channel, but then I saw he wasn't waiting for me. The Medusa was sailing much faster than I could, and soon disappeared into the mist and rain. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't turn round and go back. At high tide, as it was then, all the sand is covered, so you can't see the sandbanks or the channels, and there are no buoys. The wind was behind me too, and was very strong by this time. It was driving me straight onto the Hohenhörn sandbank. Suddenly I saw the waves breaking on the Hohenhörn right in front of me. I tried to steer along the edge of the sandbank, hoping to find a way through. But the wind carried the Dulcibella violently onto the sandbank. The next wave carried me further onto the bank, and into a little channel. I can't describe the next few minutes. My hand had been hurt, and the helm damaged in that first bump, and I had no control over the boat. The waves were crashing all around me, and finally I ran aground. Davis shook his head. I was so angry with myself you can't imagine. I couldn't do anything because my hand was useless, but that's when Bartels saw me and came to help. He'd taken shelter in a deeper part of the channel that I was in. He saw I was in difficulties, so he and his boy rowed across to me. They soon had the sails down and pulled me away from the sand and down the channel to where the Johannes lay. He's a good man, Bartels. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here now. The next day, he helped me repair the damage to the helm. He was sailing for the Ida River and onto the Baltic that way. It's longer than going by the new ship canal, but both routes come out at Kiel. I went with him, and 3 days later I was in the Baltic. I wrote to you a week after I got there. You see, by then I had realized that Dolman was a spy. He said it very simply, and I stared at him in astonishment. A spy? I said. What do you mean? A spy of what? Of whom? Well, I'm not sure that spy is the right word, but he's something very bad. He deliberately tried to make me go aground, you see. He tried to kill me. Are you sure? It was difficult to believe it. Oh, yes, said Davis calmly. I've worked it all out. Dolman knew his way through the sands, by the Telte Channel, and his yacht was big enough to manage it. You see, the Telte divides into two before the Hohenhörn sandbank. Dolman turned north, and then into the channel that goes around the Hohenhörn. But before he turned, he led me straight for the sandbank, and he deliberately left me behind, so I didn't know that he had turned. He meant me to keep going straight ahead. I should have been broken to pieces on the Hohenhörn. Why weren't you? I asked. Davis pointed again at the chart. Look, he said. The Telte divides into two quite big channels, which go round the Hohenhörn to the north and the south. But there's also a very narrow channel that goes through the middle. It's so small that I hadn't noticed it when I looked at the chart before we sailed. That's the one I was carried into. If I had been on the sandbank, the Dulcibella would have broken up in 3 minutes. I was just lucky that day. Lucky and brave, I thought to myself. But what makes you think he's a spy? I asked. Perhaps he was in difficulties too, and lost sight of you by accident. Davis shook his head. Look at it from the beginning, he said. The first time I met Dolman, he asked me all sorts of questions about what I was doing and why. I was terribly enthusiastic about my voyage, and talked quite freely. I told him that I was exploring the channels between the islands, working out all the movements of the sandbanks, and making notes about it all, because the English charts were so hopelessly out of date. After that, he did his best to get rid of me. He said there were no ducks, that the Baltic was very good for sailing and for ducks, and he offered to show me the way. He wanted to get me away from those islands. I don't think he meant to kill me at first, but when the chance came later on, he just took it. But what about his crew? I asked. Surely they would have noticed. There wasn't anyone else on deck when he told me about the shortcut. He was steering the Medusa himself. And his daughter? Do you think she wanted to get rid of you too? Davis's face suddenly went very red. I'm sure she knew nothing about it, he said fiercely. He began trying to light his pipe again, and I thought I could guess another reason why he had agreed to sail with Dolman. Let's look at it from Dolman's point of view, I said. A German finds an Englishman exploring the German coast and checking the charts. Perhaps he thought you were the spy. But that's just the point, cried Davis. He's not German. He's an Englishman. An Englishman? Yes, I'm sure of it, said Davis. Every time I spoke to him on the Medusa, he spoke German. He said he only knew a few words of English, and when he offered to show me the shortcut through the sands, he shouted in German. Now, you know that I never liked taking a pilot, so I hesitated before agreeing. He must have thought I hadn't understood him, so he shouted again, only this time in English, without any German accent. "And if he was planning to lead you to your death on the Hohenhörn," I said, "it wouldn't matter if you guessed that he wasn't German." "That's right," agreed Davis eagerly. "I knew you'd understand. I'm sure he's an Englishman, working for the German government and giving them information. He's been living here for years and has a house on Norderney. Oh, and I met a friend of his, a Commander von Bröning in the German Navy. He came on board the Medusa one day when I was there. He's captain of the gunboat Blitz, on guard duty for the fishing boats around the islands." "Did von Bröning seem to know Dolman well?" "Yes, very well," replied Davis. "Now," he continued, "let me explain what I think is happening." He took down a map of Germany from the shelf and spread it on the table. "Look at Germany. It's the strongest nation in Europe, and it's led by the young Kaiser, who is a great man for getting things done. Their industry is growing very fast, and in order to have markets for what they produce, they need colonies. To get and keep these colonies and to protect their shipping, they need a strong navy. They have only a small one at present, but it's very good, and they're building more ships as fast as they can. In Britain, we already have a strong navy, because we live on an island, and we need to protect the sea routes between us and our colonies. Most of our food comes to us by sea. If we lose control of the sea, we're finished. But Germany is in the very centre of Europe, and can get all she needs from her neighbours. She has the biggest army in the world. She can already compete with our industry, and soon she may be able to compete with our navy. And unfortunately, we're not ready for her. All our naval bases are on the south coast, opposite our old enemy, France. We have no bases in the North Sea. We should realize that Germany is the danger now, and do something about it." Davis paused and looked at me anxiously. "These are not just my ideas, you know. Other people worry about this too." "Yes, I know," I said. "But go on." Davis pointed at the map again. "Now look at the coast of Germany. It's very short, and it's cut in two by Denmark. Most of the German coast is on the Baltic, which is not much use to them, as it's too far from the Atlantic. That's why the Kaiser has built the new ship canal from Kiel to the river Elbe, so that he can move his ships from the Baltic to the North Sea quickly. The North Sea coast is the important one, but it's very short, 300 kilometres at the most. And not all of it can be used. Most of the coastline is hidden behind sandbanks, or a line of islands. There's just one wide opening, with the mouths of the three big rivers, the Elbe, the Weser and the Jade, leading to Hamburg, Bremen and Wilhelmshaven. The important bit of coast is the 112 kilometres from Borkum to the Elbe, and that's the part that Dolman stopped me exploring." He paused again, looking at the sandbanks shown on the map. "If England were at war with Germany," he added slowly and seriously, "the whole of that coast would be important, sands and all. There are channels through those sands that can only be used by small ships like Bartels Johannes. In wartime, the main sea routes to Hamburg and the other ports would be carefully guarded. But if we knew where the channels through the sands were, small gunboats could use them to attack German ships in the mouths of the big rivers. And of course, German gunboats could use them to attack our ships off the coast. Then they could disappear among the sands, where our ships would be too big to follow them. All our warships need deep water to sail in, and can't possibly use those channels." "I see," I said. I began to understand what Davis was trying to tell me. So German gunboats could travel through the sands from Hamburg to Holland, and our North Sea ships couldn't get near them. "That's right," said Davis. "Or, of course, our gunboats could do the trip the other way if we knew where the channels were. The trouble is, we don't know. None of our fishing boats use these waters, and our charts are years out of date. It just happens that I enjoy sailing in waters like these and bringing the charts up to date." "I'm not surprised Dolman wanted to get rid of you," I said. "Yes," agreed Davis, "but I'd like to know just what Dolman is doing there." "It must be something very important if he's prepared to kill you," I said, "and there's only one way to find out." Davis jumped up in excitement and hit his head on the cabin ceiling. "You mean you'll come?" he cried. "Of course," I said. "We'll have to go back to Norderney to find out why an Englishman is watching those waters and keeping other people out of them. When do we start?" "We can go back to the North Sea through the ship canal from Kiel," said Davis. "We could start for Kiel at once. The fog's lifting and there's a little southwest wind." "How far is it?" I asked. "It'll mean sailing all night." "It's only about 40 kilometers," he replied. "I know it's not the best wind we could have, but we ought to take the chance." It was hopeless arguing about winds with Davis, so we set off lunchless but full of excitement. Chapter 4. The Pathfinders. We arrived at Kiel at 1 o'clock in the morning, and the next day we made our preparations for exploring the North Sea sandbanks. We bought food, oil, and plenty of warm clothes, and I wrote to my boss at the Foreign Office requesting another week or two of holiday. I asked him to send his reply to me at the post office in Norderney, as Davis and I had no fixed address. When we were ready, we sailed the Dulcibella through the huge iron gates of the ship canal that connects Germany's two seas, the North Sea and the Baltic. For 2 days, with some of the largest ships in the world, we travelled slowly through the great waterway, wondering at the engineering and organizational ability of the nation that had created it. When we reached Brunsbüttel, at the North Sea end of the canal, Davis went off to buy fresh milk. Meanwhile, an official came on board to examine our papers. "Dulcibella," he said. "Someone from a big yacht was asking about you the day before yesterday." "Did he say what he wanted?" I asked. "Not he, Captain. It was a young lady," replied the official. He smiled knowingly. "She wanted to know if you had gone through the canal. It's a pity you missed her." "Well, we'll probably see her in Hamburg," I said. "No, she was going into the North Sea." "Did she say where?" I asked. "No," he answered, "but don't worry, Captain. There are plenty of pretty girls in Hamburg." He laughed and went on to the next boat, as Davis returned with the milk. Then the great gates opened, and we turned the Dulcibella towards the North Sea. "Well, Davis," I said, when I told him what the official had said, "Dolman can't believe he's got rid of you if he's sent his daughter to inquire after you like that." "I don't think he sent her to ask," said Davis. "I think it was her own idea to find out." He had a strange look on his face, half happy, half confused. With a strong tide, we soon reached